An excerpt from 10 Days in a Madhouse. Chapter 4. Judge Duffy and the Police. "Are you Nellie Brown?" asked the officer. I said I supposed I was. "Where do you come from?" he asked. I told him I didn't know, and then Mrs. Stannard gave him a lot of information about me. Told him how strangely I had acted at her home, how I had not slept a wink all night, and that in her opinion I was a poor unfortunate who had been driven crazy by inhuman treatment. There was some discussion between Mrs. Stannard and the two officers, and Tom Bockert was told to take us down to court in a car. "Come along," Bockert said. "I'll find your trunk for you." We all went together, Mrs. Stannard, Tom Bockert, and myself. I said it was very kind of them to go with me, and I should not soon forget them. As we walked along, I kept up my refrain about my trunks, injecting occasionally some remark about the dirty condition of the streets and the curious character of the people we met along the way. "I don't think I've ever seen such people before," I said. "Who are they?" I asked, and my companions looked upon me with expressions of pity, evidently believing I was a foreigner, an immigrant of some sort. They told me that the people around me were working people. I remarked once more that I thought there were too many working people in the world for the amount of work to be done, at which remarked Policeman P.T. Bockert eyed me closely, evidently thinking that my mind was gone for good. We passed several other policemen who generally asked my sturdy guardians what was the matter with me. By this time, quite a number of ragged children were following us too, and they passed remarks about me that were, to me, original as well as amusing. "What's she up for? Say, cop, where'd you get her? Where'd you pull her? She's a daisy." Poor Mrs. Stannard was more frightened than I was. The whole situation grew interesting, but I still had fears for my fate before the judge. At last, we came to a low building, and Tom Bockert kindly volunteered the information. "Here's the express office. We shall soon find those trunks of yours." The entrance to the building was surrounded by a curious crowd, and I did not think my case was bad enough to permit me passing them without some remark. So I asked if all those people had lost their trunks. "Yes," he said, "nearly all these people are looking for trunks." I said, "Oh, they all seem to be foreigners too." "Yes," said Tom, "they're all foreigners just landed. They've all lost their trunks, and it takes most of our time to help them find them." We entered the courtroom. It was the Essex Market Police Courtroom. At last, the question of my sanity or insanity was to be decided. Judge Duffy sat behind the high desk, wearing a look which seemed to indicate that he was dealing out the milk of human kindness by wholesale. I rather feared I would not get the fate I sought because of the kindness I saw in every line of his face, and it was with rather a sinking heart that I followed Mrs. Stannard as she answered the summons to go up to the desk, where Tom Bockert had just given an account of the affair. "Come here," said an officer. "What's your name?" "Nellie Brown," I replied, with a little accent. "I've lost my trunks and would like if you could find them." "When did you come to New York?" he asked. I did not come to New York," I replied, while I added mentally because I'd been here already for some time. "But you are in New York now," said the man. "No," I said, looking as incredulous as I thought a crazy person could look. "I did not come to New York." "That girl's from the West," he said in a tone that made me tremble. "She has a Western accent." Someone else who had been listening to the brief dialogue here asserted that he had lived south and that my accent was southern, while another officer was positive it was eastern. I felt very much relieved when the first spokesman turned to the judge and said, "Judge, here's a peculiar case of a young woman who doesn't know who she even is or where she came from. You better attend to this at once." I commenced to shake with more than the cold, and I looked around at the strange crowd about me, composed of poorly dressed men and women with stories printed on their faces of hard lives, abuse, and poverty. Some were consulting eagerly with friends, while others sat still with a look of utter hopelessness. Everywhere was a sprinkling of well-dressed, well-fed officers watching the scene passively and almost indifferently. It was only an old story with them. One more unfortunate added to the long list, which had long since ceased to be of any interest or concern to them. "Come here, girl, and lift your veil," called out Judge Duffy, in tones which surprised me by a harshness which I did not think from the kindly face he possessed. "Who are you speaking to?" I inquired in my stateliest manner. "Come here, my dear, lift your veil up. You know the Queen of England, if she were here, would have to lift her veil too," he said very kindly. "That is much better," I replied. "I'm not the Queen of England, but I lift my veil." As I did so, the judge looked at me, and then in a very kind and gentle tone he said, "My dear child, what's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong except I've lost my trunks, and this man," indicating policeman Bockert, "promised to bring me where they could be found." "What do you know about this child?" asked the judge sternly of Mrs. Stannard, who stood pale and trembling by my side. "I know nothing of her except that she came to the home yesterday and asked to remain there overnight." "The home? What do you mean by the home?" asked Judge Duffy quickly. It's a temporary home kept for the working women at number 84 2nd Avenue. What's your position there?" "I'm an assistant matron." "Well, tell us all you know about this case." "Well, I was going into the home yesterday, and I noticed her coming down the avenue. This woman was all alone. I just got to the house when the bell rang and she came in. When I talked with her, she wanted to know if she could stay all night, and I said she could. After a while, she said all the people in the house looked crazy and that she was afraid of them. Then she wouldn't go to bed, but she just sat up all night." "Had she any money?" "Yes," I replied, answering for her. "I paid for everything, and the eating was the worst I'd ever had." There was a general smile at this, and some of the murmurs of "she's not so crazy on the food question." "Poor child," said Judge Duffy. "She's well dressed and a lady. Her English is perfect, and I would stake everything on her being a good girl. I'm positive she's someone's darling." At this announcement, everyone laughed, and I put my handkerchief over my face and endeavored to choke the laughter that threatened to spoil my plans in despite of my resolutions. "I mean, she's some woman's darling," hastily amended the judge. "I'm sure someone's searching for her. Oh, poor girl. I'll be good to her, for she looks like my dead sister." There was a hush for a moment after this announcement, and the officers glanced at me more kindly, while I silently blessed the kind-hearted judge, and hoped that any poor creatures who might be afflicted as I pretended to be should have as kindly of a man to deal with as Judge Duffy was. "I wish those reporters were here," he said at last. "They would be able to find something out about her." I got very frightened at this, for if anyone who could ferret out a mystery, it's a reporter. I felt I would rather face a mass of expert doctors, policemen, and detectives than two bright specimens of my craft of reporting. So I said, "I don't see why all this is needed to help me find my trunks. These men are impudent, and I don't want to be stared at. I'll go away. I don't want to stay here." So saying, I pulled down my veil and secretly hoped the reporters would be detained elsewhere until I was sent to the insane asylum. "I don't know what to do with this poor child," said the worried judge, "but she must be taken care of." "Why don't you send her to the island?" suggested one of the officers. "Oh, don't," said Mrs. Stannard in evident alarm. "Don't do that. She's a lady. It would kill her to be put on the island." For once, I felt like shaking the good woman. To think the island was just the place I wanted to reach, and here she was trying to keep me from going there. It was very kind of her, but rather provoking under the circumstances.